the dimly lit chambers of an ancient European palace, where the scent of opulence mingled with the ever-present air of secrets, a banquet was held that would forever alter the course of history. The nobles, adorned in their finest silks and jewels, raised their goblets in an elegant toast, unaware that one among them was about to be struck down. Not by the blade of an assassin, nor by a political coup, but by something far more subtle, far more sinister. The poison nestled quietly in the bottom of a chalice. The evening had begun as any other lavish feast. Laughter echoed through the grand hall, as courtiers and royalty alike reveled in the extravagance that only the highest echelons of society could afford. The shimmering crystal chandeliers above flickered with the soft glow of candles, casting a warm glow on the polished marble floors below. The air was thick with the music of violins, the clinking of silverware, and the whispering of whispered plots. But what began as a celebration would soon unravel into a twisted tale of betrayal, deceit, and murder. "Welcome, my lords and ladies," announced the king, his voice rich with authority, yet betraying a hint of nervousness. The court had gathered in the grand banquet hall, a towering space adorned with tapestries depicting the history of their kingdom. His voice trembled ever so slightly as he raised a goblet in his hand, his eyes flickering toward the royal advisor seated at his right. The advisor, a man named Edmund, was a figure of influence in the court, known for his calculated maneuvers and whispered conversations behind closed doors. No one suspected the depth of his ambitions or the power he sought to seize. Tonight, however, he would be tested. For the first time, Edmund had not taken precautions, and a single careless decision would seal his fate. As the king spoke, a glimmer of movement caught Edmund's eye. He glanced toward the far corner of the room, where the young princess, a woman of remarkable beauty and sharp wit, was engaged in a conversation with a foreign diplomat. The princess had long been a source of intrigue in the court, her alliances and loyalties shifting like the tide. Edmund had always been cautious with her, never fully trusting her ability to outwit him. Yet, in the midst of the festivities, Edmund found himself growing careless. The game of politics, of alliances and betrayals, had become so routine that he had let his guard down. The princess, he thought, would not be his problem tonight. But the evening had only just begun. "Let us toast to the future of our kingdom." The king's declaration rang through the hall as glasses were raised, and the musicians began to play a more jubilant tune. The guests drank deeply from their chalices, savoring the rich wine that flowed freely throughout the night. Edmund, however, did not drink from the goblet he had been handed. His eyes flickered nervously toward the servant standing nearby, a small vial of poison concealed within the folds of his cloak. The servant, a man of few words and a loyalist to Edmund's faction, had been entrusted with the task of slipping the lethal dose into the king's chalice. But something had gone wrong. The servant had been distracted, his hand trembling as the vial tipped too far. The poison spilled over the rim of the king's goblet and splashed into the chalice of the young princess. Edmund's breath caught in his throat. The princess, so unassuming and innocent, was about to become the unintended target. And if she died, suspicion would naturally fall on the king and his court. The entire kingdom could erupt into chaos. The feast continued, but the mood had shifted. There was an undercurrent of tension, palpable enough for even the most oblivious of guests to sense. Edmund's mind raced. He needed to act fast, to either remove the poison or replace the princess's chalice with another. He approached the princess, his face carefully composed as he took a seat beside her. "A fine evening, Your Highness," he said, his voice smooth, yet carrying the weight of something darker beneath it. She smiled, her eyes sparkling with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Indeed, Lord Edmund, but I cannot help but feel that the air has changed. Something seems off." She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Do you feel it too?" Edmund stiffened. Had she noticed? Was she playing a game of her own? Her intelligence had always been her sharpest weapon, and in that moment he wondered if she had already seen through his thin facade. "Perhaps you are simply tired, Your Highness. This wine is known to make even the strongest of us weary." Edmund smiled, but the words tasted bitter in his mouth. The princess, to Edmund's relief, didn't press further. She took another sip from her goblet and smiled again. It was a soft, almost innocent gesture, yet it carried the weight of something far more dangerous. Her drink was laced with poison, and she knew it. But what Edmund didn't realize was that the princess had long been aware of the plot against her. She had been watching him carefully, noting the subtle shifts in his behavior and the strange glance he had thrown at the servant earlier. She knew her life was at risk, but she had no intention of dying tonight, not without a fight. As the evening wore on, the princess made her move. She signaled to a trusted ally, the captain of the Royal Guard, who had long been her confidant. He approached quietly, his footsteps almost imperceptible in the noise of the feast. The plan was set in motion. "Do you feel ill, Your Highness?" Edmund asked, his voice now thick with urgency. The princess, her face pale but composed, looked up at him with a faint smile. "No, Lord Edmund. In fact, I am feeling quite invigorated." Before Edmund could react, the princess stood and raised her goblet high. "A toast to those who serve the kingdom loyally, and to the ones who have kept our secrets well hidden for so long." The room fell silent, and all eyes turned toward her. Edmund's blood ran cold. The princess's voice rang out, her words sharp and deliberate as she held her goblet high, its contents reflecting the flickering candlelight. Edmund's heart raced, a cold sweat forming on his brow. His mind raced for an explanation, a way to twist the situation to his favor, but he could feel the eyes of the court upon him, watching, waiting. "A toast," she continued, her eyes meeting his for a fleeting moment, "to loyalty, to trust, and to those who would poison a chalice of peace." The entire hall was dead silent, a collective breath held in unspoken tension. The princess, still smiling, took a measured sip from her chalice, as though savoring the moment. For a long beat, nothing happened. No one dared move, not even to blink. The noble guests, unsure of whether to applaud her daring words or to recoil from the accusation that hung in the air, simply stared in anticipation. Edmund's chest tightened. He had known her for years, yet never had he seen her so bold, so unflinchingly aware of the game being played around her. Had she been waiting for this moment all along, pretending innocence while subtly gathering the pieces of the puzzle? He couldn't afford to let this turn into a spectacle. "Your Highness," Edmund managed to say, his voice thin with feigned calmness, "what do you mean by such words? A toast to loyalty." He cleared his throat, struggling to keep his composure. "It's hardly fitting to cast such insinuations during the height of our celebration." The princess did not flinch. Her smile deepened, and for a moment it seemed as though the very air had thickened around her. The courtiers began to murmur, sensing the growing tension, but not fully understanding the danger that lurked beneath her words. Edmund's mind whirled, looking for an escape route, but it was too late. The captain of the royal guard, the princess's ally, stepped forward with a purposeful stride. He stood beside her, his posture commanding, his eyes locked onto Edmund. The court had not yet recognized him as the figure of authority that he truly was in this moment. "Lord Edmund," the captain said coolly, his voice calm, yet carrying the weight of finality. "It seems that the princess has more than an inkling of the treachery at play tonight. I believe you were under the impression that your poison would remain a secret. But, as the princess has so wisely pointed out, it seems that secrets are far more difficult to keep than we would like." Edmund's mind reeled. His carefully laid plans were crumbling before his very eyes. How had the princess uncovered his scheme? The servant, the poison, it was all supposed to be undetectable. Yet here she was, standing so calmly, poised in the face of what should have been her death sentence. "Enough!" Edmund shouted, his voice betraying the panic now surging through him. "This is madness. Do you think you can accuse me without proof? Without any evidence to back up your claims?" The princess shook her head slightly, her expression unreadable, but there was no doubt in her eyes now. She was in control. The courtiers had gathered their bearings, and murmurs spread like wildfire through the hall. "I have proof enough," she replied softly, her voice dripping with calm assurance. "The poison in my chalice, which I have tasted already, was meant for another. But it was carelessly spilled, wasn't it, Edmund?" The words hung in the air like a trap, ready to snap shut on him. Edmund's heart pounded, each beat louder than the last, echoing in his ears. He had miscalculated. His mind had become too clouded with ambition. The princess had been playing him all along. She had seen the signs, she had known the danger, and now she was taking the final step in her own game of strategy. Before he could respond, the captain of the guard stepped forward once again. This time, he was holding something in his hand, a vial, small and unassuming, but its contents could not be mistaken. The same vial that had been given to the servant to poison the goblet. The captain held it up for all to see. "Do you recognize this, Lord Edmund?" the captain asked, his voice colder now, filled with the weight of finality. "It was found in your possession, hidden under the folds of your cloak. Do you deny that this vial contains the poison that was intended for the king?" Edmund's face went pale. He knew in that moment that his fate had been sealed. The vial had been planted on him, no doubt by the princess and her trusted ally. He opened his mouth to speak, to protest, to beg for mercy, but the words caught in his throat. There was no escaping it now. The king, who had been watching the entire scene unfold with growing disbelief, finally spoke, his voice low and tremulous. "Edmund, you have betrayed me, betrayed this court." His voice was thick with sorrow. "Your ambition has led you down a path from which there is no return." Edmund's knees buckled and he fell to the ground, his hands trembling as he clutched the ornate floor of the hall. His mind raced, trying to find an answer, an excuse, a justification. But there was none. He had played the game too greedily, and now he would pay the price for it. The princess, ever calm, turned to face the king. "Your Majesty," she said with quiet authority, "it seems that your loyal advisor was not so loyal after all. His actions were not only an attempt on your life, but also a conspiracy against the very heart of this kingdom. The betrayal runs deep, and if we do not act swiftly, it may spread further." The king, his face lined with both sorrow and anger, nodded solemnly. "What do you propose we do, Your Highness?" "Justice must be swift," she replied, her voice resolute. Edmund must be held accountable for his treachery, and all who were involved in this plot must face the consequences. Only then can we restore peace to this court. As the court erupted into a flurry of discussion, the princess and the captain exchanged a knowing glance. The king's fate had been narrowly averted, but the battle for control of the kingdom was far from over. Edmund, once the king's most trusted advisor, had played his final hand, and the princess had outmaneuvered him at every turn. In the shadows, the game was still being played, and though Edmund's downfall had begun, the secrets of the nobility and royalty had only just begun to unravel. The true question remained: who would rise to fill the void left by the fall of the ambitious advisor, and what other dark secrets would the court expose in the days to come? The atmosphere in the grand hall was thick with uncertainty, as Edmund, now kneeling before the king, felt the weight of his downfall crash over him. The murmurs of the courtiers echoed through the room like a distant storm, their eyes shifting between the princess, the captain, and the broken man at their feet. The king, his face a mixture of disbelief and sorrow, slowly rose from his throne. The regal poise he had maintained throughout the years now seemed fragile, his once unshakable authority now pierced by the revelation of his closest advisor's betrayal. He turned to his royal guard, a sharp command in his eyes. "Take him away. We will have no more of this treachery in our kingdom." The guards, though hesitant at first, stepped forward and seized Edmund by the arms. He was dragged from the hall, his head hanging low in shame. His fall from grace was as swift as it was merciless, and the reality of his failed ambition settled in like a stone. The princess, still standing tall beside the king, watched Edmund's departure with a quiet satisfaction. Her plan had worked flawlessly. Not only had she saved the kingdom from a deadly plot, but she had also secured her own position. Edmund had underestimated her, believing her to be a mere pawn in his grand design. But now she stood in the shadow of power, her position solidified by her cunning and foresight. "Your Highness," the captain said softly, his voice low, "you've done more than save the kingdom tonight. You've exposed the corruption at the heart of the court. This kingdom owes you a debt of gratitude that cannot be repaid." She smiled, though it was not one of joy. It was the smile of a woman who had played a dangerous game, and won. "The kingdom may owe me nothing," she replied, "but it has earned a debt to itself." This court was rotting from the inside. Edmund was merely a symptom. The disease runs deeper than any of us realize. Her words, though calm, carried a weight that only those who understood the intricacies of power could truly grasp. The kingdom was teetering on the brink of a great shift. The princess knew that Edmund's fall was only the beginning. In his wake, other factions would rise, eager to fill the power vacuum left behind. "Is it truly over?" the captain asked, his brow furrowed in thought. The princess turned to face him, her eyes narrowing with the keen insight that had brought her to this point. "For Edmund, yes. But for us, number, the real game has just begun." As the captain nodded in agreement, the princess glanced around the hall. The courtiers, now whispering in small groups, seemed to sense the tension in the air. The feast had turned from one of celebration to one of uncertainty. No longer were they simply reveling in luxury and wealth. They were now witnesses to a game of power, one in which loyalties were shifting and old alliances were being tested. "The king must be protected," the captain said, his tone grim. "There will be those who seek to exploit his vulnerability now." The princess nodded, her gaze never wavering. "I know. I have already taken steps, The king's safety is paramount, but so too is the safety of the throne. Edmund's treachery will not go unpunished, but there are other forces at play, hidden in the shadows, waiting for their moment to strike. She paused, her mind racing with the implications of what had just transpired. The plot against the king had been a close call, but it was far from the only danger lurking in the depths of the court. Edmund's betrayal was a single thread pulled from a much larger tapestry, and she could already feel the fraying edges beginning to unravel. In the following days, whispers filled the palace like a swarm of bees. The courtiers, once loyal to Edmund, began to scatter, looking for new allegiances to secure their own futures. Some would swear fealty to the princess, while others would seek to align themselves with the king, hoping to restore some semblance of order. But beneath the surface, a different kind of battle was being fought. The princess, always vigilant, took to her chambers in the dead of night, poring over the ancient texts and treaties that bound the kingdom together. She knew the kingdom's power was fragile, and the court's corruption ran deeper than anyone realized. But even more troubling was the discovery she had made during her investigation into Edmund's treachery. There was a network of influence, one that stretched beyond the palace walls and into the very fabric of the kingdom. Edmund had not acted alone. He had been part of a much larger scheme, a cabal of powerful figures who sought to manipulate the royal family for their own gain. The poison in the chalice was merely a symptom of their larger machinations. The princess's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on her chamber door. She turned, her eyes narrowing slightly, before calling out for the visitor to enter. The captain of the royal guard stepped inside, his face somber. "Your Highness, there is something you need to see." He handed her a letter, its seal broken, the parchment aged and worn. The handwriting was unmistakable, Edmund's, but the words within were chilling. "I have only just begun," the letter read. The poison was merely the first strike. "You think yourself safe, but you are mistaken. The throne is not yet yours, and the game is far from over." The princess's heart skipped a beat. The words were a direct challenge, a threat, one that she could no longer ignore. Her grip on the letter tightened, and for the first time since Edmund's fall, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. Edmund was dead, but his influence still lingered, like a shadow that refused to fade. The true enemy was still out there, pulling strings from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The game had not ended. It had only just begun. The princess sat in stunned silence, the letter crumpled tightly in her hand. The captain watched her, his expression unreadable, as if waiting for her next move. He had seen her navigate treacherous political landscapes before, but this letter, this message, felt different. The calm, calculated defiance in Edmund's words hinted at something more insidious than a simple plot for power. Edmund was not alone. He had been part of a far larger conspiracy, one that had burrowed deep into the heart of the kingdom. "Who else?" the princess whispered, her voice barely audible. The question was as much to herself as to the captain. Who had Edmund been working with? Who else could be pulling the strings from the shadows, silently guiding the fate of the court? The captain stepped forward and placed his hand gently on her shoulder, as if to offer comfort, though he knew no words would suffice. "We don't know yet, Your Highness. But we will find out. The king trusts you, and so do I." She nodded, though her mind was far from reassured. The captain's loyalty was unwavering, but loyalty, she knew, was a fragile thing in a world where ambition ruled all. For all his strength and support, the princess could not afford to trust anyone too easily, Not now, not with the darkness lurking so close. The days that followed were marked by a sense of mounting tension. The news of Edmund's downfall spread quickly through the kingdom, but the ripples of his betrayal were still being felt. Courtiers, once his allies, now looked over their shoulders, uncertain of their place in the new court. Many sought to align themselves with the princess, recognizing her sharp intelligence and steady hand, but others remained loyal to the king, hoping that his troubled reign would return to a semblance of normalcy. But the princess had no illusions. The court was like a tangled web, and Edmund's death had merely disturbed the strands. There were too many hidden agendas, too many secret alliances waiting to rise to the surface. One evening, as the princess walked the halls of the palace in deep thought, she was approached by an old servant, her eyes furtive and her steps quick as she neared the princess. "Your Highness," the servant whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder, "there is something you need to hear." A whisper from the lower halls. "It concerns Lord Edmund and a secret meeting, one that took place not long before his fall." The princess stopped in her tracks. A meeting. What meeting? The servant hesitated, biting her lip. "I don't know all the details, but I overheard. One of the guards mentioned names, powerful names, the Duke of Lamberton, Lady Seraphina, the king's cousin, and someone who calls himself the Serpent. They've been meeting in secret, and their plans, I fear they have only just begun, the Serpent." The princess repeated the name softly, a shiver running down her spine. "I've never heard of him." The servant shook her head. "Neither have I, but his influence is growing. He is said to be the mastermind behind several unsavory operations, not just here, but across the kingdom." The princess took a deep breath, her mind racing. A new player, one she had not yet accounted for. The game was shifting, and she needed to understand the players before they could make their move. "Where did these meetings take place?" she asked, her voice sharp with resolve. "In the old crypts beneath the castle," the servant replied quietly. "They were using the tunnels to avoid suspicion. I don't know when they plan to meet again, but I heard that a grand scheme is brewing." The princess's eyes narrowed. The crypts, the very place where secrets had been buried for centuries. She had never suspected that Edmund's treachery would lead her to this forgotten part of the palace, where shadows lingered and ancient stones held the weight of countless untold stories. "Thank you," the princess said, her tone firm but quiet. "You have done well." As the servant quickly retreated into the shadows, the princess's mind churned with 1,000 thoughts. The crypts, the serpent, the Duke of Lamberton, and Lady Seraphina. Each of these names now held significance, each a thread that could unravel the tightly woven fabric of the kingdom. The princess knew she could no longer sit idly by and wait for the enemies to reveal themselves. She had to act. But first, she needed to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. She would need to delve into the depths of the palace, into the crypts where the true power struggles played out in the dark. The princess gathered her closest allies in secret. The captain of the royal guard, her trusted confidant, stood by her side, along with a handful of the most loyal servants and spies. They moved with purpose, their steps swift and silent, as they descended into the depths of the castle. The crypts were cold, damp, and forgotten by most of the court. The air was thick with the scent of age-old dust and decay. Cobwebs clung to the walls like the remnants of forgotten secrets, and the low, distant sound of dripping water echoed through the stone corridors. They reached a heavy wrought-iron door, its hinges rusted with age. The captain turned to the princess, his face serious. "We must be careful, Your Highness. The crypts may hold more than we expect. The princess nodded, her gaze fixed on the door. I'm prepared for whatever we find. But we must know the truth. The kingdom's future depends on it. With a final nod, the captain pushed open the door, revealing a narrow stairway leading down into the darkness. The princess steeled herself and descended, the weight of the world pressing down upon her as she ventured further into the heart of the castle's secrets. As they moved deeper, the air grew colder, and the flicker of their torches cast long shadows on the walls. They reached a small, hidden chamber at the far end of the crypt, where the faint sounds of voices could be heard. The princess signaled for silence, and the group crouched low, their breathing barely audible in the stillness. The voices grew clearer, and with them, the full realization of the magnitude of the plot before her. "The time is almost here," one voice said, low and urgent. "The serpent will come, and once he does, the kingdom will be ours." The princess's heart quickened, the words echoing through the cold, damp stone walls of the crypt. She motioned for her companions to remain silent, her breath steady as she leaned in closer, straining to hear every syllable. "The serpent will come," the voice repeated, more urgently this time. "And when he does, the kingdom will be ours." The other voice, an unfamiliar one, deep and gravelly, spoke next, its tone laced with ambition. "It's not just the throne that we seek. The royal bloodline must be severed entirely. The princess is too strong to ignore, too clever. She must fall before we can truly claim what is ours." The princess's pulse raced at the mention of her name. They were plotting her death. The same people who had orchestrated Edmund's downfall were now working in the shadows, conspiring against her. The serpent, a mysterious figure who had remained hidden until now, was the one pulling the strings behind this new conspiracy. "We will act swiftly," the gravelly voice continued. "Once the serpent arrives, we'll have the tools we need to take the throne. The princess won't stand a chance." The princess felt a wave of fury rise within her, but she tempered it, knowing that rash actions could endanger not only her life, but the kingdom as well. She glanced at the captain, who stood by her side, his face unreadable, but his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He, too, had heard the conspiracy unfolding in the chamber. "We must leave, Your Highness," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "We cannot risk exposing ourselves now. We'll gather information, then make our move." The princess nodded, her eyes never leaving the hidden chamber where the conspirators plotted. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing on her. This was more than just a plot to kill her. This was a coup, a deep-rooted plan to take the kingdom. The serpent, whoever he was, had allies in the court, and they were more dangerous than Edmund ever was. As they quietly retreated, the princess's mind raced with the implications of what she had just learned. The kingdom was on the brink of chaos, and she could no longer afford to trust anyone, except those few who had proven their loyalty. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the full picture was still far from clear. They made their way back through the crypts, every step echoing in the silence, each one feeling heavier than the last. The captain led the way, and the princess followed, her thoughts consumed with the looming threat. She had to move quickly. Time was running out. Once they emerged from the depths of the palace and back into the safety of the familiar hallways, the princess took a deep breath. The cold air of the crypts still clung to her, a reminder of the dangers lurking beneath the palace. She turned to the captain, her face resolute. "We need to act," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. We will expose these traitors before the serpent arrives. We cannot let them destroy the kingdom." The captain nodded, his expression hardening. "We will, Your Highness. But we need more than just information. We need allies, and we need to move fast." The princess's eyes darkened as she considered their next move. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. But she was not about to let the kingdom fall into the hands of conspirators, especially not when so much was at stake. "We have one advantage," the princess said, her voice tinged with a hint of confidence. "The serpent thinks he is playing a game of shadows, but shadows can be turned against those who hide within them." The princess spent the next few days in seclusion, meeting with only her most trusted allies, the captain, her spies, and a handful of loyal courtiers who had stood by her side since the early days of her rise to power. They devised a plan, a daring, risky move that could expose the conspirators before they could strike. The key was to draw the serpent out into the open. But first, they would need to gather more information about him and his inner circle. The princess knew that they couldn't simply confront him head-on without knowing who exactly they were dealing with. The serpent's network was vast, and he had likely planted many more operatives within the palace. Late one evening, as the court began to settle into the calm of night, the princess gathered her closest allies in the palace's highest tower. It was a space of refuge for her, a place where she could think and plan without the prying eyes of the court. The captain stood beside her, his presence reassuring but heavy with the weight of the task ahead. "I've received word," the captain said, his voice low, "that there are whispers of a meeting between the serpent's allies tonight. The Duke of Lamberton is expected to attend, as well as Lady Seraphina." The princess's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the opportunity to gather the final pieces of the puzzle. She could not waste it. "We will follow them," she said decisively, "but we cannot act too hastily. We must know everything. Who is behind this plot, and how far does it go?" The captain nodded. "I will prepare a small group, will remain in the shadows and observe, as we did before. But this time, we'll be ready to strike when the time comes." The princess turned her gaze to the horizon, her eyes narrowed with determination. The sun was setting, casting the kingdom in a warm, golden glow. But beneath that peaceful facade, there was danger, a storm brewing that could shake the foundations of the royal family. "We will not let them succeed," she said, her voice firm. "The throne is not theirs to claim. Not while I still draw breath." With that, the plan was set in motion. That night, as the conspirators gathered in the depths of the palace once again, the princess's spies were already in place, hidden in the shadows. The court had settled into its usual rhythm, but beneath the surface, something far darker was unfolding. The princess, disguised as one of the courtiers, made her way toward the secret meeting place. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind focused on the task ahead. The serpent, the Duke of Lamberton, Lady Seraphina, they were all in her sights. The game was nearly over. The final move was about to be made. The princess's steps were quiet but determined as she made her way through the corridors, her cloak sweeping behind her like a shadow. Her heart raced, every beat echoing in her chest as she approached the secret meeting place. This was it. Tonight, the conspirators would be exposed, their plans unraveled, and the throne secured. But she knew better than to be overconfident. Every moment was fraught with danger. One mistake, and the kingdom could be lost forever. The secret meeting chamber was hidden deep within the palace, an old, forgotten room that had once served as a sanctuary for the royal family centuries ago. Now it was a place where power was whispered into existence, where betrayal thrived in the shadows. As the princess approached the door, she signaled for her most trusted spy, a nimble and quiet figure who had been following the conspirators from the very beginning. He nodded, understanding the plan without a word. They would wait for the meeting to begin, observe carefully, and gather every scrap of information they could before making their move. The door creaked open slowly, and the princess slipped inside, blending into the darkness like a ghost. She crouched low behind a pillar, just out of sight, her eyes scanning the room. There, seated at the far end of the chamber, were the key figures of the conspiracy. The Duke of Lamberton, his face heavy with the weight of years of secret dealings, sat at the head of the table. Beside him, Lady Seraphina, the king's cousin, watched the proceedings with an air of arrogance, her eyes gleaming with ambition. But it was the figure beside them that caught the princess's attention, the one who had been spoken of only in whispers, the one who had stayed hidden until now. The serpent. The man wore a hooded cloak that concealed his features, but the air of power surrounding him was undeniable. He was tall, his movements measured, exuding the kind of quiet menace that made even the bravest of men hesitate. The princess's breath caught in her throat. This was the man behind it all, the puppet master who had been pulling the strings from the shadows. "The time has come," the Duke of Lamberton said, his voice low but filled with resolve. "Edmund's failure has only brought us closer to our goal. Once the princess is removed, the throne will be ours. We will control the court. We will control the kingdom." Lady Seraphina nodded in agreement, her lips curling into a sly smile. "The king is weak. His mind is unraveling, and the princess—" She paused, her eyes narrowing. "She is a threat. But we can deal with her, just as we dealt with Edmund." The serpent raised a hand, silencing the others. His voice was deep, commanding. "Patience, my friends. We must move carefully. The princess is not as fragile as you think. She has made alliances, and those alliances will not be so easily broken." The princess's heart skipped a beat. The serpent knew more than she had anticipated. He had been watching her, studying her every move. But he had underestimated her. He didn't know that she had already infiltrated his circle, that she had heard his every word. "We'll need to act swiftly," the Duke interjected, his face betraying his eagerness. "The longer we wait, the more chances we give her to fight back." "No," the serpent said sharply. "We wait. The game is almost finished. Once the princess is out of the way, the king will be nothing more than a puppet, and we will pull the strings." The princess's hands clenched into fists at her sides. The serpent's plan was clearer now, but so were the risks. The conspiracy reached far deeper than she had imagined, more powerful than Edmund's simple treachery. It was an orchestrated effort to dismantle the entire royal family and seize control of the throne. If she couldn't stop them, the kingdom would fall. Just as the princess was about to retreat into the shadows, she heard a faint noise, a soft footstep. She turned quickly, only to see one of her own spies slipping into the room behind her. The spy's eyes widened in panic when he saw her. "What are you doing here?" the princess hissed, her voice barely a whisper. The spy had clearly disobeyed orders, and in doing so, had put everything at risk. I couldn't let you go alone," the spy whispered back, his voice trembling. "I thought you might need backup. But I didn't realize—" The princess pressed a finger to her lips, signaling for silence. The spy's presence was dangerous, but there was no time to reprimand him. She had to act now. "Stay here," she whispered urgently. "Don't move. If they see us." But it was too late. One of the conspirators, a lesser noble who had been lurking in the corner, spotted the spy. The man's eyes widened in recognition, and his mouth opened to shout a warning. "Traitors!" he cried, his voice loud and sharp. "There!" In the shadows, the room erupted into chaos. The Duke of Lamberton stood up, his hand reaching for his sword. Lady Seraphina's eyes gleamed with malice as she rose to her feet, a knife appearing from her sleeve. And the serpent. He remained calm, though his eyes narrowed with cold calculation. "Seize them," the serpent ordered, his voice quiet but deadly. "They know too much." The princess's instincts kicked in. In one swift motion, she drew a dagger from her belt and tossed it to the spy. He caught it, his hands shaking, but he knew what to do. They would fight, but they had no choice but to make their escape. The princess lunged forward, her dagger slicing through the air with deadly precision. She was a blur of movement, the master of her own fate, as she dispatched the first of the conspirators with a swift strike. The captain of her guard, who had been following closely behind, charged into the room, his sword flashing with deadly intent. But despite their skill and speed, the conspirators had the advantage of numbers and familiarity with the chamber's layout. The princess's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the fight would not be easy. They were surrounded. "Retreat!" the captain shouted, his voice commanding. "We need to get out of here!" With a final, desperate push, the princess and her allies broke through the ranks of the conspirators, forcing their way to the door. They dashed down the hallways of the palace, their footsteps echoing in the night as they fled into the shadows, leaving behind the chaos of the secret meeting room. As they made their way to safety, the princess's mind raced with what had just transpired. The conspiracy was deeper than she had thought, and the stakes had never been higher. The serpent had shown his hand, but there was no time to rest. The battle was only just beginning. "We'll need reinforcements," the princess said, her voice filled with resolve, "and we need to move quickly. The serpent is not going to stop." Her eyes met the captain's, and in that moment, they both knew that the kingdom's future hinged on their next move. The serpent's plot had been exposed, but the game was far from over. The night was thick with tension as the princess and her small group of loyalists hurried through the palace corridors, every footstep a reminder of the danger that now surrounded them. The conspirators had been thrown into disarray for the moment, but the princess knew better than to think the battle was won. The serpent had revealed himself, but in doing so, he had only shifted the war into a more dangerous phase. The captain moved beside her, his eyes scanning their surroundings, alert to every sound. "Your Highness, we must reach the royal safe house. We'll be able to regroup there, plan our next move. But we can't stay here." The princess nodded, her thoughts spinning. The crypts, the meeting, the conspirators, all of it was part of a much larger web than she had ever anticipated, and in the center of that web was the serpent, his dark influence extending far beyond the edges of the royal court. She could no longer afford to trust anyone blindly, not even those who had sworn allegiance to her. "Agreed," she replied, her voice steady. "We'll take shelter at the safe house, but we need information. We need to know how deep this goes, who else is involved." As they navigated the shadowy hallways, the princess's mind drifted to the cryptic message Edmund had left behind. "I have only just begun." Those words haunted her, a chilling reminder that the forces arrayed against her were far more powerful and well-connected than she had realized. They reached the royal safe house, a small, secure chamber nestled deep within the palace. The walls were thick and the windows barred, ensuring that no one could easily break in. The princess's trusted advisor, Lady Isabel, was already waiting inside, along with a handful of loyal courtiers. As they entered, Lady Isabel immediately rose to her feet, her eyes filled with concern. "Your Highness, what happened?" she asked, her voice laced with apprehension. "The word from the palace is that there was a disturbance." "The guards are on high alert." The princess locked eyes with her, her expression hard. "The conspiracy has been exposed, but it's only the beginning. The serpent is behind it all. We need to act quickly before he can rally his forces and make another move." Lady Isabel's face paled at the mention of the serpent's name. "So it's true. I had feared as much. But what can we do now? How do we stop him?" The princess walked over to the map that had been spread out across the table. The kingdom was vast, and every corner was teeming with secrets, both loyalists and traitors, alliances and betrayals. She traced her finger along the map, her mind working at full speed. "We have to strike at the heart of the conspiracy," she said, her voice steady, but filled with determination. "The serpent is no fool. He has already set his plan in motion. But he's not expecting us to strike back so soon." The captain stepped forward, his face grim. "We need to expose the key players, Your Highness. The Duke of Lamberton, Lady Seraphina. These are people who cannot be left to operate in the shadows. But we'll need more than just information. We need power." The princess nodded, a plan beginning to form in her mind. "We need to win the trust of the people. The serpent may have the support of the court, but if we can rally the people behind us, we can take back the kingdom." "But how do we do that?" Lady Isabel asked. "How do we break the serpent's grip on the court and the kingdom?" The princess's eyes hardened with resolve. "We need to make an example of those who have betrayed us. The Duke and Lady Seraphina are just the beginning. We'll expose their connections, their lies, and make sure the people see them for what they are." The captain raised an eyebrow. "That could be dangerous. If we move too quickly, the people could turn against us." The princess turned to him, her gaze unyielding. "If we do nothing, the kingdom will fall into the hands of men like them. We must act decisively. The serpent cannot be allowed to manipulate us any longer." The plan was set. They would begin by gathering evidence against the Duke of Lamberton and Lady Seraphina. But more than that, they would expose the depths of the serpent's influence within the court. There were whispers of his connections beyond the kingdom's borders, powerful allies in distant lands who sought to destabilize the throne for their own gain. As the princess and her allies made their preparations, the sense of urgency grew. The serpent was not a man who could be underestimated, but neither was the princess. She had learned much from her years navigating the court, from the delicate balance of power and the shadows where secrets festered. She would not allow this conspiracy to succeed. The days that followed were filled with quiet preparations and careful movements. The princess continued to meet with her most trusted allies, laying the groundwork for the confrontation that was soon to come. She had sent her spies to gather information about the Duke of Lamberton's recent dealings, and they had uncovered a network of covert operations, sabotage, bribery, and covert alliances with foreign powers, all linked to the serpent's web of influence. One evening, as the princess reviewed the documents brought to her by her spies, she felt a chill in the air. It was a feeling she had learned to recognize, the quiet before a storm. She glanced at the captain, who stood by the door, his eyes scanning the room with quiet vigilance. "Have we learned everything we can?" she asked, her voice low. The captain nodded. The Duke of Lamberton is even more deeply entangled than we thought. He has been sending resources and troops to an undisclosed location, something that could mean he's preparing for an uprising. And Lady Seraphina, she's been meeting with foreign diplomats, men who have been seen in the company of the serpent. The princess stood up, her mind racing. The conspiracy is far-reaching, but it still has weaknesses. We know who the players are, and we know their plans. Now we need to strike before they can strike us. Your Highness, what's our next move? The captain asked, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. The princess looked out the window, her gaze hard and unyielding. We expose them. We force them into the light, and then we bring them down. The stage was set. The princess would take her message to the people, rallying support for her cause while exposing the truth behind the conspiracy. At the same time, her allies would begin to dismantle the network of betrayal piece by piece. The Duke of Lamberton, Lady Seraphina, and their associates would be forced to confront the consequences of their actions. And though the serpent remained a shadowy figure, his control slipping, the princess was determined to draw him out, no matter the cost. The game was on, and this time she would be the one pulling the strings. The dawn of the next day broke with an air of uncertainty hanging over the kingdom. The princess, still cloaked in the shadows of the conspiracy, had made her move. The plan to expose the treacherous elements within the court was already set in motion, but the tension in the air was palpable. The serpent's influence was still deeply rooted, and the risk of retaliation was high. Yet, the princess knew she could not wait any longer. Time was not on her side. The streets outside the palace buzzed with rumors and whispers. Word had spread of the princess's sudden rise to power, and the whispers of betrayal that had already rocked the kingdom. A storm was gathering, and the princess knew it was her time to seize the moment. She gathered her closest allies in the safe house, each of them prepared for the actions that would unfold in the coming days. The captain, who had stood by her side through every moment of danger, was more resolute than ever. Your Highness, the captain began, his voice low but filled with confidence. The people are restless. The rumors are spreading like wildfire, and they're beginning to question everything they've been told. They know something's wrong. The princess nodded, her gaze hardening with resolve. We need to give them the truth. The serpent has woven his web too far. If we do not act now, the kingdom will fall into his hands. Lady Isabel, ever the strategist, spoke up. We have the evidence we need. The Duke of Lamberton's dealings, Lady Seraphina's betrayal, all of it. We can expose them publicly, but we must be careful. We cannot afford to make a mistake. The princess's eyes flared with determination. There will be no mistake. We will reveal their true faces, and when we do, the people will rally behind us. The serpent's darkness will be dragged into the light. That night, a large gathering was called for in the grand square outside the palace. An event masquerading as a royal address, but in truth, it was the princess's calculated move to expose the conspiracy once and for all. The court's loyalists would come, as would the people. And in that moment, the truth would be unveiled. The square was bathed in the golden light of the evening, the crowd teeming with citizens, merchants, and nobles alike, all waiting to hear the words of the princess. The royal banners hung from the pillars that lined the square, the palace looming in the distance as a symbol of both power and vulnerability. The princess stood tall on the balcony, her cloak billowing in the cool evening breeze. She had made sure that every detail was in place. The evidence was ready to be shown, and the conspirators' names, their crimes, would be laid bare before the eyes of the public. Behind her, the captain and a handful of loyal guards stood watch, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd for any signs of danger. It was a calculated risk. The serpent's supporters would undoubtedly try to disrupt her, but she had prepared for that. The elements of the plot had been carefully laid, and now was the time for the pieces to fall into place. With a sharp breath, the princess raised her hand, signaling for silence. The murmurs of the crowd slowly died down, and all eyes turned toward her. The tension was thick, but she stood unwavering, her resolve unshakable. This was her moment. "People of the kingdom," she began, her voice ringing out over the square, clear and commanding. "For too long, we have lived under the shadow of betrayal, under the weight of lies. The throne has been threatened, the royal family betrayed, and the kingdom itself endangered." A murmur swept through the crowd. The whispers were growing louder now, curiosity building as they sensed something momentous was about to unfold. "The time has come," she continued, her voice stronger now, "to expose those who have conspired against you, against the throne, and against the very future of this kingdom. The truth must be known." She motioned for the captain, who stepped forward, carrying a heavy scroll. He unrolled it, revealing the names of those implicated in the conspiracy: the Duke of Lamberton, Lady Seraphina, and their hidden allies. "The Duke of Lamberton," the princess said, her voice hard with accusation, "has secretly worked to dismantle the crown's power, to line his pockets with the riches of betrayal. His alliances with foreign powers, with those who seek to destabilize our kingdom, are proof of his treachery." The crowd gasped, and a few voices called out in shock. The princess did not pause. She was relentless now, every word calculated to strip away the veils of deceit. "And Lady Seraphina," she continued, "the king's own cousin, has worked alongside the Duke, offering her loyalty only to further her own ambitions. She has manipulated the court, used her position for personal gain, and now stands exposed for her crimes." At the mention of her name, Lady Seraphina's face, now among the crowd, twisted in fury, but the princess's gaze never wavered. She knew the battle was far from over, but this was the moment to strike the first blow. Together, they have been in league with a shadowy figure, one who has controlled the fate of this kingdom from behind the scenes, a man known only as the Serpent. The crowd hushed. The name sent ripples of fear through the gathered masses. The Serpent was a myth, a figure of whispers and rumors, but now his name was tied directly to the kingdom's betrayal. "His influence runs deep," the princess said, her voice cold with fury, "but no more. We will hunt him down, expose his web of lies, and rid this kingdom of the poison he has planted in its heart." With that, the princess held up a set of sealed letters, documents that confirmed the extent of the conspiracy. The people in the square watched in stunned silence as the truth was laid bare. The letters contained evidence of bribery, corruption, and covert dealings with foreign enemies, all orchestrated by the Duke, Lady Seraphina, and their hidden master, the Serpent. "But we are not powerless," the princess declared. "The Serpent has shown himself to be weak. His allies are no longer safe in their shadows, and those who have betrayed us will be brought to justice." A cheer erupted from the crowd. The people, who had lived in fear and uncertainty, now felt the surge of hope. They knew the battle was far from won, but the princess had shown them that there was still a chance to take back their kingdom. The conspirators, their names now exposed to the public, began to stir. Lady Seraphina, her face flushed with anger, pushed her way through the crowd, but the guards quickly closed in, blocking her escape. The Duke of Lamberton was nowhere to be seen, likely already fleeing into the shadows of the court, trying to salvage what little power he had left. But the serpent, the true architect of the conspiracy, had not yet been revealed. His shadow still loomed large over the kingdom, and the princess knew that the war was far from over. His agents, those still loyal to him, would move in the coming days. But for now, the princess had struck the first decisive blow. The people knew the truth, and the conspirators had been exposed. It was only a matter of time before the rest of the plot unraveled. "Tonight, we stand united," the princess said, her voice rising above the cheers. "Tonight, we take back our kingdom." The crowd erupted in applause, their cries of support filling the square, echoing through the palace. The serpent's influence had begun to crumble, but the real battle had only just begun. The roar of the crowd in the square reverberated through the palace walls. The princess stood tall on the balcony, her heart racing with adrenaline. For the first time in weeks, the weight on her shoulders seemed a little lighter. The exposure of the conspiracy had rattled the nobles, and while some had managed to slip into the shadows, the people were now aware of the treachery that had threatened the kingdom. Yet, even as the cheers of the crowd filled the air, the princess's mind was already moving to the next phase of the plan. The game was far from over. The serpent had not yet shown his true face, and the Duke of Lamberton and Lady Seraphina had only begun to feel the consequences of their actions. This victory, though significant, was just the beginning. The captain approached her from behind, his steps swift and purposeful. His face was solemn, but there was a flicker of approval in his eyes. "Your Highness, the people are with us now. The tide has turned, but we must move quickly. The serpent will not remain hidden forever. He will retaliate." The princess turned to him, her eyes hardening. "I know. But the truth is out now. The serpent is no longer a shadow. He has been exposed, and once the people see the extent of his manipulation, they will demand justice. He may be powerful, but no one can stand against the truth." The captain nodded, his brow furrowed with concern. "The question is, where do we go from here? The serpent's network is vast. There are still many who will do his bidding in the court, and we cannot forget that he has influence beyond the borders of this kingdom." The princess's gaze turned to the map that lay on the table before them, her finger tracing the lines of territory and alliances. "I know the stakes. We need to cut the serpent off at his roots. We will gather every last piece of evidence we can. His allies, his hidden connections. Once we have it all, we'll move in for the final strike." Lady Isabel, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward, her face serious. "The serpent's influence goes beyond the court. I've heard rumors of his dealings with foreign mercenaries, and there are whispers that he may have allies in the neighboring kingdoms. If he has international connections, we could be looking at a conflict on a far larger scale." The princess's expression tightened. She had known that the serpent was no ordinary foe, but the thought of foreign powers being involved only deepened the complexity of the situation. "Then we must act swiftly. I'll send a messenger to the neighboring courts. If the serpent has agents there, we need to alert our allies before they can make a move." The captain stepped closer, his eyes sharp. "And the Duke and Lady Seraphina?" "Public trials," the princess said with resolve. "They will face the justice they've so carelessly avoided. They will be examples of what happens when you betray the kingdom. But we must be careful. Their supporters will try to disrupt the proceedings. We must maintain control over the narrative." Lady Isabel gave a sharp nod. We have enough evidence to convict them, but the people will need to see it. If we expose their ties to the serpent and his network, their supporters will have no choice but to turn on them." The princess paused, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. The wheels were in motion now, and every decision she made would ripple out, shaping the future of the kingdom. She had not asked for this war, but she was determined to see it through. The serpent's grip on the court was weakening, but there was still much work to be done. "We'll need to move carefully, but decisively," she said, her voice steady. "The people have seen the truth, and now they want justice. We will give it to them, and we will take back our kingdom, once and for all." In the days that followed, the court was thrown into turmoil. The princess's public address had shaken the very foundations of the kingdom. Many courtiers who had once supported the Duke and Lady Seraphina now found themselves questioning their allegiances. The whispers of the serpent's true identity spread like wildfire, and though some still clung to the hope that the old power structures could be restored, more and more people began to rally behind the princess. The trials of the Duke of Lamberton and Lady Seraphina were set in motion. The charges against them were grave: treason, betrayal, and conspiring with foreign powers to undermine the royal family. But the princess knew that exposing them was only part of the battle. She needed to break the hold that the serpent had on the court, and that meant cutting off his supporters, one by one. She worked tirelessly with her allies, gathering intelligence, setting traps for those still loyal to the Duke and Lady Seraphina. There were whispers of new plots brewing in the court, and though the princess could not trust anyone completely, she knew that her allies, those who had stood with her from the beginning, would be her strength. One evening, as the trials were set to begin, the princess received an unexpected visitor. It was a messenger, cloaked in the garb of a foreign emissary. He had arrived under cover of darkness, and his message was urgent. "Your Highness," the messenger said, bowing low before her, "I bring word from the neighboring kingdom of Saldora. The serpent has made contact with their court. There are talks of an alliance that could turn the tide in his favor. They seek to use their mercenaries to destabilize your reign." The princess felt a chill run through her. The serpent's web stretched farther than she had imagined. Saldora had long been an ally, but if the serpent had already begun to weave his influence there, the kingdom could be facing a much larger threat. "We must act," the princess said, her voice a whisper of steel. "Prepare a letter of alliance with Saldora. We will send a diplomatic envoy, and we will make sure they know that the serpent is no friend of theirs." The messenger nodded, but before he could leave, the princess stopped him. "And be careful. If the serpent has allies in Saldora, he may have agents here as well. Trust no one who isn't already loyal." The messenger's eyes widened, understanding the gravity of her words. "Yes, Your Highness. I will be careful." As the messenger departed, the princess stood alone in her chamber, contemplating the road ahead. The serpent had made his move, and though she had exposed his conspirators, he was still a dangerous and elusive figure. The princess knew that in order to secure the future of her kingdom, she would have to face him head-on. And when she did, she would not back down. The trial of the Duke of Lamberton and Lady Seraphina began amidst great fanfare, with the entire court in attendance. The princess sat at the front, her face impassive as the charges were read aloud. It was a spectacle, a public reckoning for the traitors who had once held power over the kingdom. But as the trial progressed, the tension in the room began to mount. The serpent's influence still lingered, and there were whispers of hidden hands pulling strings from behind the scenes. But the princess was not to be deterred. She had the truth on her side, and no matter how many obstacles the conspirators threw in her path, she would see justice done. As the trial reached its climax, the Duke of Lamberton, his face pale and broken, stood and cried out in desperation. "You don't understand. This is bigger than any of you. The serpent will come for you all." The princess remained silent, her gaze never leaving him. His words were nothing more than a last-ditch attempt to sow fear, but the people had already made up their minds. The serpent's name had been exposed, and it was only a matter of time before the truth caught up with him. And then, just as the trial seemed to reach its conclusion, the unexpected happened. A figure emerged from the shadows at the back of the court, a figure cloaked in black, their face hidden beneath a hood. The serpent had come. The courtroom fell into stunned silence as the figure cloaked in black stepped forward, their presence commanding and sinister. The serpent, the very man who had orchestrated the treachery that had plagued the kingdom, was now standing before them, his hidden face barely visible beneath the dark hood. His steps were slow, deliberate, as if he knew that the room was already filled with fear and uncertainty. The princess's heart raced, but she did not show it. Her eyes remained fixed on the figure, calculating her next move. The serpent had come to make his final play, and now it was her turn to respond. "Who dares to enter this court unannounced?" the princess demanded, her voice cold, sharp like a blade. "You have no place here." The serpent's voice emerged from the shadows, smooth and silky, with a hint of mockery. "Oh, but your highness, I believe I have every right to be here. After all, it is my conspiracy that you've been so kind to unravel. I think it only fair that I face my accuser directly." He took a step forward, his cloak swirling around him like a living shadow. The courtiers in the room shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to react. Some were loyal to the princess, others still loyal to the old power structures that the serpent represented. The air was thick with tension. "I've spent years carefully constructing a network of influence," the serpent continued, his eyes gleaming through the shadow of his hood. "Years of patience, of playing the game, of watching all of you dance like puppets in my hands. But you, princess," he said with a twisted smile, "you've proven to be an intriguing challenge." The princess's fists clenched at her sides, but she kept her composure. "You've betrayed the kingdom. And now you will pay for your crimes. You've manipulated the court, used fear to control the nobles, and nearly destroyed everything this kingdom stands for." The serpent's smile only deepened. "Ah, but you see, your highness, the kingdom belongs to those who are willing to seize it. You and your noble ideals are just the final fleeting breath of a dying age. I am simply ushering in the new one." His words cut through the room like a blade. The court, divided as it was, seemed on the verge of panic. Some began to murmur, unsure whether to support the princess or heed the serpent's call for change. The princess's voice rang out, cutting through the noise. "Enough," she commanded, her tone unwavering. "You may think you have the upper hand, but the truth is on our side. The people know your lies, and you will be held accountable for everything you've done." The serpent chuckled darkly. "The truth? Your truth, perhaps, but the world is filled with lies, princess. The truth is often malleable, just like the loyalty of those around you." He turned to the courtiers, his gaze shifting from one noble to the next. "Do you truly believe she has your best interests at heart? Or are you all simply pawns in a new game?" The tension in the room grew unbearable. The princess could see the seeds of doubt being sown. The serpent was an expert manipulator, and if she allowed him to keep speaking, he could turn the court against her in an instant. But she wouldn't let that happen. "You are the liar," the princess said, her voice laced with venom. "You've manipulated this court, twisted it to suit your desires. You have made deals with foreign powers, with mercenaries who wish to bring this kingdom to ruin. You sought to destroy the very throne you claim to want. And now, it is time for you to face the consequences." The serpent's face hardened. "You really think you can defeat me, princess?" His tone was now laced with something darker. "You're nothing but a figurehead, your power weak and fleeting. The court is mine to command. The kingdom is mine to rule." With a sudden, swift movement, the serpent pulled a dagger from his cloak, its edge glinting dangerously in the candlelight. The courtiers gasped as the serpent raised it high, ready to strike at the heart of the princess's rule. But before he could make a move, a blur of motion caught his eye. The captain of the guard lunged forward, his sword drawn, his eyes blazing with fury. The clash of steel rang through the room as the captain met the serpent's blade, pushing him back with all his strength. "You will not touch the princess," the captain snarled, his sword raised, his posture ready for another strike. The serpent's eyes narrowed in fury as he backed away, his dagger still clutched in his hand. "This isn't over, princess. You've won this round, but I have many more tricks left to play. The game is not finished yet." As the serpent turned to flee, disappearing into the shadows of the courtroom, the princess felt a surge of triumph. She had exposed him for all to see, and yet the battle was far from over. The serpent had retreated for now, but he was not done. He would strike again, but the princess was no longer the naive pawn in his game. She was the queen, and the game was hers to win. The aftermath of the serpent's appearance was nothing short of chaotic. The courtiers were thrown into confusion as the news of the serpent's attempted assassination spread like wildfire. Those who had been loyal to him began to distance themselves, sensing the tide turning in the princess's favor. The trials for the Duke and Lady Seraphina continued, their guilt all but sealed. But the serpent's retreat had left one critical question hanging in the air. Who among the courtiers was still in his pocket? Who could be trusted, and who was a potential threat to the throne? The princess knew that she could not afford to wait for another attack. She would not let her kingdom fall back into the hands of those who sought to manipulate and control. It was time to purge the court of the remaining traitors and take full control of her destiny. She convened a meeting with her most trusted allies, those who had fought beside her from the beginning, and laid out the next phase of their plan. The serpent may have retreated, but he was still a threat, and the threat would need to be neutralized once and for all. "We strike now," the princess said, her voice full of determination. "The court must see that we are united. We will cleanse the kingdom of corruption and make sure the serpent's influence is eradicated. The throne is mine to defend, and no one will take it from me." With her command, the final battle for the kingdom began. The princess had won the first major victory, but now she had to finish what she had started. The serpent was still out there, but his days of shadowy manipulation were numbered. The princess was no longer the hunted. She was the hunter, and this time she would not stop until the kingdom was safe, and the serpent was nothing more than a memory. The days following the serpent's dramatic appearance in the court were marked by intense scrutiny and caution. The princess had made significant strides in exposing the treachery within her kingdom, but the serpent's escape had reminded everyone that the battle was far from over. The atmosphere in the palace was charged with a sense of urgency. Every action now carried the weight of the kingdom's future. The princess sat in her chamber late into the night, poring over documents, dispatches from her spies, and the various reports of movements within the court. Her mind raced with thoughts of the serpent, where he was hiding, who was still loyal to him, and how far his influence stretched. She had to move quickly, decisively. Every moment spent waiting was a moment that allowed the serpent to regroup and strike again. "Your Highness," Lady Isabel's voice broke the silence, and the princess turned to face her trusted advisor. "The council has convened. They're awaiting your decision." The princess stood up, smoothing the folds of her gown as she approached the map spread across the table. The realm was vast, and there were far too many dark corners for the serpent to hide in. She had received word of an uprising in a neighboring province, a province that had long been loyal to the serpent's agents. If the conspirators in the court were not enough, the outside forces they could rally would make any direct confrontation all the more perilous. "The people are with us now," the princess said, her voice firm. "But we need to show them that we are not afraid to take action. The serpent may have fled the court, but his network is still active." She traced her finger along the province on the map, marking the location of the uprising. "We will strike there first," she decided. "We will send a clear message that no one, no matter their loyalty to the serpent, will be allowed to threaten the kingdom." Lady Isabel nodded. "I'll make the arrangements for an immediate deployment of the royal army. But we need to be cautious, Your Highness. The serpent may be hiding in plain sight. He could be working through other factions, waiting for the right moment to strike." The princess turned back to face the window, the cool night air brushing her face. "I know," she said, a quiet intensity in her voice. "But we can't wait any longer. If we don't act now, the serpent's influence will spread even further. The people must see that we are in control, and we will do whatever it takes to secure the throne." With a final look at the map, she made her decision. "We march tomorrow. The court may still be divided, but the people are ready for change. We will take back control of the provinces and crush any remnants of the serpent's influence." The princess's decision to march was met with both anticipation and apprehension. The royal army, though loyal, had never been fully tested in such a confrontation. The uprising in the province was small in scale, but its roots were deep, and the serpent's supporters were entrenched in key positions. To confront them head-on would require the full might of the royal army, and the princess knew that any sign of weakness could spell disaster. As the army prepared for departure, the princess held a final meeting with her most trusted advisors, the captain of the guard, and her most loyal generals. The tension in the room was palpable as they discussed their strategy. "We'll strike at dawn," the captain said, his voice low and steady. "We'll cut off the serpent's forces before they have a chance to organize. We'll hit their supply lines and disrupt their command structure. This will be quick, but it needs to be decisive." The princess nodded. "We don't have the luxury of time. The longer we wait, the stronger their resolve will become. We need to show them that they cannot defy the throne without consequences." The princess's strategy was clear. They would strike fast, isolating the serpent's supporters and dismantling their network. She had already ordered the royal spies to infiltrate key positions within the province, gathering intelligence on the enemy's movements and planning a surgical strike to take out the heart of the uprising. But there was something else that gnawed at her, an unsettling feeling that the serpent was not simply in hiding. His sudden disappearance from the court felt too calculated. He had allowed the princess to expose him, knowing full well that she would come after him. His absence was not a retreat. It was a move to lure her into a false sense of security. As the princess left the war room and made her way to the royal stables, the captain caught up with her, his expression grave. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "we must also prepare for the worst. The serpent's agents are still in the court. They may attempt to sabotage the march or strike at us from within." The princess stopped and turned to face him. "I know. And that's why we must strike now, before they can organize. We'll deal with the court once we've secured the provinces." She mounted her horse, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. The road ahead was fraught with peril. Even if they succeeded in quelling the uprising, the serpent's true plan remained unknown. The march to the province was swift, the royal army moving with precision and efficiency. The princess rode at the front, her expression focused, her gaze never wavering from the road ahead. She could feel the eyes of her soldiers on her, watching for any sign of doubt. But there was no room for doubt now. As they neared the province's border, the sky above darkened. A storm was brewing in the distance, and the air felt thick with the promise of something catastrophic. The princess paused, looking out over the horizon. In the distance, the lights of the rebel forces flickered like fireflies, signaling their presence. The serpent's army was waiting for them, poised to make their final stand. She drew a deep breath, then turned to the captain. "We're not just fighting for the throne anymore. We're fighting for the kingdom's future. Make sure we win this." The captain nodded and turned to his men. "Prepare for battle." The princess's heart pounded in her chest, but there was no turning back. This battle would determine the fate of the kingdom, and she would lead her people to victory, no matter the cost. The clash of steel rang through the valley as the royal army met the rebels on the battlefield. The storm overhead broke with fury, rain pouring down in torrents as the two forces collided. The princess fought at the front, her sword flashing through the rain as she cut down her enemies with deadly precision. The captain and his guards were at her side, their movements fluid and synchronized, as if they had practiced for this moment their entire lives. The battle raged on for hours, the rain turning the ground to mud as the two armies struggled for dominance. But with each passing minute, the princess's forces gained ground. The serpent's army was disorganized, their lines fracturing under the weight of the royal army's assault. At the center of the battle, the princess's forces began to push the serpent's supporters back. But even as victory seemed certain, the princess's mind remained focused on the larger picture. She could feel the serpent's shadow looming over the battlefield, as though he were watching from afar, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, just as the tide seemed to turn in their favor, the princess's worst fears were realized. From the depths of the woods surrounding the battlefield, a new force emerged. Mercenaries, trained and ruthless, their eyes glowing with the cold fire of the serpent's influence. The serpent had sent his final gambit. The mercenaries emerged like phantoms from the dense fog of the woods, their silhouettes barely visible against the darkening sky. They were well trained, their movements precise and calculated, as if they had been waiting for the right moment to strike. The princess's heart clenched with realization. This was the serpent's final move. His agents had been biding their time, waiting for the moment when they could tip the scales of battle in his favor. The clash of steel intensified as the mercenaries joined the fray. The Serpent's loyalists had been scattered across the battlefield, but these mercenaries were different. Elite soldiers, armed with weapons that gleamed with deadly intent. They moved through the royal army like a knife through butter, cutting down soldiers with ruthless efficiency. The princess's mind raced. She had expected treachery, but not like this. These mercenaries were the Serpent's ace, and their arrival could change the course of the battle. The storm above seemed to echo the turmoil below, thunder crashing as the wind whipped through the trees, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet in front of her. "Captain!" the princess called, her voice rising above the chaos. "We need to regroup. We can't allow them to encircle us." The captain nodded, his face grim. "We'll fight through them, Your Highness. But we need to hold the line, or we'll be overwhelmed." With a fierce rallying cry, the princess urged her horse forward, cutting through the enemy ranks. The captain and his guards followed close behind, their swords flashing in the storm. They fought with everything they had, the rain soaking them to the bone, the sound of metal on metal ringing in their ears. Every strike was a struggle for survival. But the mercenaries were relentless. They fought with the precision of a well-oiled machine, and as they pushed forward, the royal army began to falter. The rebels and their mercenary allies had gained the upper hand, and the tide of battle was shifting. As the princess fought her way through the enemy, her eyes searched desperately for the Serpent, but he was nowhere to be seen. He had orchestrated this entire ambush from the shadows, remaining hidden as his mercenaries took control of the battlefield. She couldn't afford to be distracted. She had to focus on the task at hand, leading her soldiers and ensuring the Serpent did not win this war. In the midst of the chaos, the captain's voice cut through the storm. "Your Highness, over here!" The princess turned to find the captain holding a group of soldiers at bay, the Serpent's mercenaries closing in on their position. The royal guards were fighting valiantly, but they were outnumbered, and the mercenaries had cut off their retreat. "We need to fall back!" the captain shouted, his sword flashing as he cleaved through an enemy soldier. "We can't win this fight unless we regroup and rally the others." "No!" the princess cried, her voice firm. "We fight! We will not surrender!" But as she spoke, the ground beneath them shook with the sound of heavy hooves. A cavalry unit had arrived, reinforcements finally, but they were not part of the royal army. They were mercenaries too, dressed in the same dark uniforms as those who had come before. The princess's heart sank. The Serpent had thought of everything. He had prepared for every contingency, and now the royal army was trapped, surrounded on all sides by forces that were too powerful to defeat. "We have no choice," the captain said, his expression filled with determination. "We need to withdraw. We cannot win this battle without reinforcements." The princess's mind raced. She could feel the weight of the kingdom's future pressing down on her. If they retreated now, they would lose everything they had fought for. The Serpent would be free to continue his manipulation, and the throne would fall into his hands. But if they fought on, they risked total annihilation. A harsh cry echoed from across the battlefield, and the princess's eyes snapped to the source of the sound. She saw her army faltering, the enemy's forces closing in on their position. A retreat was no longer an option. They would have to make a stand. With a surge of resolve, the princess turned back to the captain. "We fight to the last. We will not let this kingdom fall. Rally the soldiers. We are not done yet." The captain nodded, his face resolute. "As you command, Your Highness." As the battle raged on around them, The princess fought with a fury she had never known before. Every strike, every movement was infused with the weight of her kingdom's survival. Her sword was an extension of her will, and with each blow, she felt the strength of her resolve pushing her forward. And yet, despite her strength, the enemy's numbers were overwhelming. The royal army was beginning to fall back, retreating to a narrow pass where they could hold their ground for a moment longer. "Stay strong," the princess shouted, rallying her soldiers. "We will fight through this, for the kingdom." But as she spoke, a familiar face appeared through the smoke and chaos. The captain, his face smeared with blood, his eyes frantic. "Your Highness, we need to retreat. Now." The princess's heart pounded in her chest. "No! We stand our ground." But the captain's eyes were filled with grim certainty. "The serpent's army has already surrounded us. We cannot win this fight." We have lost. A wave of cold realization washed over the princess. The battlefield had turned into a trap. They had no way out. The serpent's forces were too vast, too well prepared. For the first time since the war had begun, the princess saw the grim reality: defeat. Her soldiers were exhausted, their numbers dwindling, and the enemy's mercenaries were closing in. The serpent's army was too strong. "We cannot hold," the captain said, his voice heavy with regret. "It's over." The princess's mind raced, her heart torn between her duty and her survival. They could not win this battle, but they could still escape. If she could find a way out, she could rally more troops, find new allies. The war was not over. Not yet. With one last glance at the battlefield, the princess made her decision. "Fall back," she commanded. "We retreat." Now. The royal army, battered and broken, began to withdraw in an organized, though desperate, retreat. The serpent's forces followed closely behind, but they knew their victory was certain. For now, the battle was won, but the war was far from over. As the princess led her men through the narrow pass and into the woods beyond the battlefield, she knew the stakes had never been higher. The serpent had won a battle, but the war was far from finished. She would find a way to stop him. The kingdom would not fall, not while she still drew breath. The princess led her retreating, forces through the thick woods, the sounds of battle fading behind them, but the weight of their defeat hung heavily in the air. The rain had started to subside, leaving the ground slick and treacherous beneath their boots. Soldiers limped, their bodies battered from the battle, their spirits weary from the relentless onslaught of the serpent's forces. The retreat had been swift, but even in their withdrawal, there was no denying that they had lost the battlefield. The serpent had outmaneuvered them. But the princess was not one to give in so easily. As they moved further into the safety of the woods, her mind raced. She could hear the captain's voice in her head. "The serpent's army is too powerful. You cannot win this fight." But she refused to believe it. The serpent may have won this battle, but he had not yet won the war. "We cannot stop now," the princess said, her voice firm, though it was clear she was as exhausted as her soldiers. "We will regroup. We will find allies. This fight is not over." The captain, who had fallen into step beside her, nodded solemnly. "Your Highness, we have lost our advantage. The court's loyalty is fractured. The serpent has allies not only among the nobles, but now with foreign mercenaries. We need more support. We can't fight this war alone." The princess turned to face him, her expression unwavering. "We don't need just allies. We need to expose the serpent for what he truly is. He's a coward who hides behind his soldiers, manipulating everyone around him. Once the people know the truth, he will have no place to hide." The captain's brow furrowed. "But how?" Your Highness. We cannot win this war through words alone. He has already infiltrated every corner of this kingdom. The princess paused for a moment, her gaze lingering on the dimly lit horizon. Then we'll expose him. But we must do it with strategy. We must show the court, the people, everyone who is still loyal to him, that he is not invincible. He's a shadow, and shadows can be erased. The retreating army stopped for a brief rest in the relative safety of a small clearing. Soldiers collapsed to the ground, their weapons heavy in their tired hands. The princess, however, remained standing, her mind racing with possibilities. The war had taken a turn for the worse, but she was not about to surrender. She would not let the kingdom fall. Over the next few days, the princess and her most trusted advisors worked tirelessly to regroup and devise a new strategy. They were in desperate need of reinforcements, but they knew they could not rely on traditional alliances. They had already lost so much, and the serpent's network was vast. The princess knew that she had to think outside the box, to find a way to turn the tide in her favor. "We need the people," Lady Isabel said one evening as they gathered around a map of the kingdom. "The serpent has worked through fear and manipulation, but the people, they can be the key to winning this war." The princess looked at her, intrigued. "Explain." Lady Isabel leaned forward, pointing at various regions on the map. "The serpent's influence is strongest in the court, among the nobles. But the provinces, the people there, they are starting to see the cracks in his power. If we can show them that the serpent is not invincible, if we can expose him as a liar and a coward, the common folk will rise up. They will take control of their own destiny." The princess's eyes narrowed as she considered this. "You're right. The people are the kingdom's heart. If we can sway them, we can undermine the serpent's power from the ground up." She turned to the captain. "We'll need to send emissaries to the provinces to rally the people. We need to show them the truth about the serpent. He may have foreign mercenaries, but the people outnumber him. And if we can unite them, we can turn the tide of this war." The captain nodded, his expression resolute. "I'll prepare the emissaries, Your Highness. We'll work through the night if we have to." As the plan took shape, the princess's mind raced with possibilities. She had always known the power of the court, but she had underestimated the power of the people. If she could rally them, expose the serpent for the manipulator he truly was, the entire foundation of his power would crumble. But even as she formulated her plan, a sense of unease gnawed at her. The serpent was not a fool. He would not sit idly by as she worked to undo everything he had built. His response would come soon, and when it did, she had to be ready. The next few days were a blur of activity as the princess and her advisors coordinated their efforts. Emissaries were sent to the provinces, carrying messages of rebellion and hope, calling on the people to rise up against the serpent's rule. The princess knew that these messages were risky. They could be intercepted, twisted, and used against them. But she had no choice. Time was running out, and the serpent would not stop until he had destroyed everything she loved. As the emissaries departed, the princess gathered her remaining forces. They were a small but loyal group, and they would need to move swiftly and strategically if they were to have any hope of defeating the serpent. The princess paced the room, her thoughts racing. The serpent had a well-oiled network of spies and informants, and he would no doubt try to track down her emissaries. She needed to act quickly before he could stop them. "Your Highness," the captain said, breaking her thoughts, "we have a report from the northern province. The serpent's mercenaries are moving in force, And they've already begun to harass the people. They're trying to suppress the rebellion before it can gain momentum. The princess's face hardened. We knew this would happen. We can't let them succeed. Gather the forces. We'll strike before they can consolidate their power. The captain nodded, his face grim. We'll move at dawn. I'll prepare the troops. As the princess prepared for the battle ahead, she couldn't help but wonder, would the people rise up as they had hoped, or would the serpent's manipulation be too powerful to overcome? At dawn, the royal forces set out, their movement swift and silent. The princess led the charge, her heart filled with determination and a quiet sense of resolve. This battle would determine the fate of the kingdom, and she would not let the serpent win. The clash of steel and the cries of soldiers filled the air as the two forces met in a battle for control. The serpent's mercenaries fought with viciousness and discipline, but the princess's forces were driven by something greater: the truth. They fought not just for victory, but for the future of the kingdom. The battle raged on for hours, but as the day wore on, it became clear that the princess's forces were gaining ground. The serpent's mercenaries were faltering, their resolve weakening as the truth of the rebellion spread. Then, in the midst of the chaos, the princess caught sight of a familiar figure. The serpent himself had appeared on the battlefield, his cloak flowing behind him like a shadow. But this time, he was not hidden in the shadows. This time, he was standing in front of her, ready to make his final play. The time had come. The battlefield was thick with the fog of battle, smoke rising in curling tendrils as the clash of swords and shields rang through the air. The princess's heart thundered in her chest, but there was no hesitation in her step. She could see the serpent now, his hooded figure standing tall amidst the chaos. He had come, but this time he would face her directly. The rain had stopped, but the remnants of the storm had left the battlefield slick and treacherous. The princess tightened her grip on her sword, the cool steel familiar and steady in her hand. She knew this moment was coming. The final confrontation. The serpent had tried to break her resolve, had played every card to destabilize the kingdom. But now, he was here, standing before her, and the time had come to end his reign of manipulation. "Ah, princess!" The serpent's voice cut through the noise of the battle, smooth and mocking as ever. "You truly are relentless, but do you honestly think you can stop me now? Your army is crumbling. Your alliance is fractured. You've lost the people's trust. All of this," he gestured around him, "it's already slipping through your fingers. How long can you fight when the kingdom is already divided?" The princess's eyes narrowed, her voice cold and unwavering. "You've played the long game, serpent. You've twisted the truth, manipulated those around you, but you've underestimated one thing." "And what is that?" The serpent sneered. "The people," she said simply. "You may have thought you could control them with fear and lies, but you were wrong. They see you for what you are, a coward hiding behind others. You never expected them to fight back." For a moment, the serpent's smile faltered, his eyes flashing with something. Resentment, perhaps. Then he recovered, drawing his blade with a swift motion. "You think you've won, princess? Even if you defeat me, others will rise in my place. There is always another puppet to pull, another hand to guide the kingdom." "We'll burn the puppet strings," the princess declared, stepping forward, her sword gleaming in the dim light. "You're not invincible. You've made your play, and now it's over." With a flick of his wrist, The serpent lunged at her, his movements quick and precise, but the princess was faster. She sidestepped his strike, feeling the rush of wind from the blade as it missed her by inches. She countered, her sword cutting through the air in a graceful arc, but he parried with ease, his eyes never leaving hers. "This kingdom belongs to those who take it," the serpent growled, stepping back to reassess. "You are nothing but a figurehead, an obstacle in my way. The throne will be mine, and you will fall, just like those who came before you." The princess stood tall, undeterred. She knew he was trying to break her, to shake her confidence, but she had something he didn't: truth. And with truth, she had the support of the people, the very ones he had tried to control and manipulate. "Your game is over," she said, voice strong and clear. "You've lost. The people will never follow you." The serpent's eyes narrowed, and he charged again. But this time, the princess was ready. She blocked his strike, their blades locked for a moment, sparks flying from the metal. She pushed him back with a strength born of determination, her mind sharp with the knowledge that this fight would decide everything. He staggered, thrown off balance for just a second. That was all she needed. In one fluid motion, she twisted her blade and struck, aiming for his chest. But the serpent was faster than she anticipated. He dodged, the edge of her sword grazing his cloak. "I'm not finished yet," he hissed, rolling backward to regain his stance. The princess didn't give him the chance. With a battle cry, she pressed forward, her movements faster than before, more deliberate. She fought not just for herself, but for the future of the kingdom, her kingdom. With each strike, she cut through the serpent's defenses, her blows landing with precision. And then, it happened. In a moment of pure clarity, the princess saw an opening. The serpent's arrogance had made him overconfident, and for the briefest of moments, his guard slipped. With a swift, calculated move, the princess disarmed him. His sword clattered to the ground, and in an instant, she had him pinned, her blade at his throat. The battlefield fell silent. The sounds of fighting faded into the background as all eyes turned to the princess, who stood over the serpent, her chest heaving, her face fierce and unyielding. The serpent glared up at her, his expression twisted in rage and defeat. "Yield!" the princess commanded, her voice steady, unwavering. "This kingdom is not yours to take." "You have lost." For a moment, the serpent said nothing. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, his eyes burning with hatred. But then, slowly, as if recognizing the inevitable, his shoulders slumped. The fight was gone from him. His gaze shifted to the ground. "Do what you will," he muttered, his voice cold. "You've won." The princess didn't lower her sword, but the weight of the moment was heavy on her shoulders. She had defeated him, but the cost had been high. The kingdom was scarred, fractured by the conflict, and the work of rebuilding would be long and difficult. But one thing was clear: the serpent would never rule the kingdom. "I'm not your judge," the princess said quietly, withdrawing her blade. "But justice will be served. The people will decide your fate." The captain stepped forward, his sword still drawn, his face grim. "Take him away," he ordered, and the guards moved to seize the serpent, binding his hands in chains. As the serpent was escorted off the battlefield, the princess stood still, watching him go. She felt the weight of the moment pressing on her. This was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another. "Your Highness," the captain said softly, his voice filled with respect. "It is over. You've done it. You've defeated him." The princess nodded, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. The battle had been won, but there was still much to be done. The court needed to be rebuilt, the people needed to be healed, and the scars of war would take time to fade. But for now, the princess allowed herself a moment of relief. She turned to face her army, the soldiers who had fought so valiantly at her side. "This kingdom is ours," she said, her voice strong and filled with hope. "Together, we will rebuild it, and we will ensure that the serpent's darkness never returns." The soldiers cheered, their voices echoing through the woods. The rain had stopped, the clouds breaking to reveal a sky that seemed to promise new beginnings. The princess's heart swelled with pride as she looked at the faces of her people, those who had fought for her, who had believed in her, and who had fought for the kingdom's future. The road ahead would be difficult, but together they would forge a new era. And with that, the princess knew. The serpent may have come close to claiming the throne, but he had underestimated the power of the people. They would rise again, and the kingdom would be theirs to rebuild.